This is Privateer's race bike.
It's easy to go really fast on, and if you're not winning, it's on the rider, it's not on the bike.
Few bikes have resonated with core riders more than Neko Mulally's anti-establishment project frameworks. There's no gimmicks, there's no fancy marketing hype behind them. They're just American-made, race-proven, intentionally designed frames. The downhill bike has quickly turned into one of the more popular options for privateer racers in the US, not to mention the success it's seen at World Cups under Asa Vermette, Anna Newkirk, and Angel Suarez. I can't think of a bike that better matches the ethos of Vital and our passionate community of gravity-focused riders, so the stoke could not be higher to finally be testing this bike. And to add to that excitement, since Framework sells frames only, we were lucky enough to get our hands on one of their spare team bikes, Angel's spare bike to be exact. So we've got no excuses not to go fast and a lot of expectations for what this bike is capable of. So let's get right into it. Neko Mulally's homegrown, World Cup winning downhill frame. Bouncing around the parking lot, it is probably one of the tallest bikes I've ever stood on, and it's very low, which is interesting. I always say I want the tallest bike so you can be stood up in neutral, gives you a good spot to kind of react from. So this is kind of what I've always been asking for. It's gonna be interesting to see how that rides paired with a fairly long rear end as well. I'm curious how that'll feel in corners. I think it'll feel pretty good. Curious how getting the bike balanced might feel. It feels pretty balanced bouncing around the parking lot, but the rear end does feel a little soft, even though I'm definitely within range of recommended sag. Other than that, I'm so hyped to ride this thing. Like, it just looks so cool. It's simple. There's no it's not trying to be something it's not. It's just a race bike. So yeah, I'm hyped for it. Neko's main goal with this bike was to give riders a kinematics package that's predictable with a frame that's not overly complex and it's easy to work on. They didn't have $1 million to create this bike, but they did have Neko's experience from years of racing World Cups and the ingenuity that comes from having limited resources. 6061 T6 aluminum makes up the front triangle, and then you have a carbon molded rear end that is connected with an aluminum rocker link. The top and down tubes are straight without any bends to increase strength and simplify manufacturing. And the bottom bracket junction is made from a single CNC piece of aluminum to ensure consistent frame and pivot alignment. And the carbon rear end further guarantees frame alignment while also reducing weight. The frame is welded by Frank the Welder out of Vermont, and then all of these CNC parts are done by 5Dev in San Diego, and then frame assembly itself is done by Neko and his brother Logan, which is pretty rad. The bike uses a 4-bar horse-link suspension layout with the mid-pivot and offers 3 leverage rates by changing the position of the lower shock mount. You have the option between 30, 32, and 34% progression. The anti-rise is kept fairly low and consistent throughout travel to improve suspension feel under braking. The axle path moves backwards 6 millimeters for the first 120 millimeters of travel before moving 12 millimeters forward by the end of the stroke. Neko figured out that you spend most of the time between sag and 120 millimeters of travel, which is when the axle growth is the smallest. This makes the bike very predictable in corners as the rear center doesn't change that much. The downside is it gives the bike a higher anti-squat value and a bit more pedal kickback. So an O-chain or other kickback devices is recommended to minimize this.
Wow, that's kind of crazy. You can see the chain growth from the pedal kick by just going to sag. Ready? Did you see that change?
You have the choice of 2 frame sizes, medium or large. The medium has a 455 millimeter reach, while the size large that we tested right here has a 485 millimeter reach. You can make either size smaller or larger by installing a reach adjust headset, thanks to a zero stack 56 headset. Chainstay length is fixed, stack heights are quite high, and the bottom bracket is quite low. Updated for 2025, the head angle is a touch slacker, going from 63.3 to 63 degrees, and the head tube is 15 millimeters taller on the large size. 2 laps in on the frameworks, which is not a lot, but my initial things I'm dealing with is just getting balanced over the bike. It's definitely one of the lowest, longest reach and just longest wheelbase bikes I think I maybe have ridden. The reach doesn't feel too long, but it's longer than what I've been riding. Kind of the same with the bottom bracket. It's not too low, it's just lower than what I'm used to. And the rear end is also quite long. The balance I'm struggling with is I just took Neko's recommendations and I'm a little oversprung for what they recommend for sag. They recommend 20 mils. I'm at 16 right now. So I'm gonna get my spring rate right in the rear and then start making adjustments to fork and maybe handlebar height from there to get more weight over the front end. Currently I'm off the back more and I'm struggling to get my weight over the front even if I kind of over exaggerate my riding position. But the shock is also maybe not the plushest in like really big hits as I was expecting. So get the spring rate right, maybe go down in fork pressure or a lower bar after a couple more runs. And I think that'll get me closer to the balance I'm looking for. You could say the BB is pretty low. I was just trying to do pedal grinds out there, you know?
I'm riding the framework second. Pretty excited to get on this thing. The bottom bracket right off the bat feels pretty low and the bars feel pretty high. So you just feel encased by the bike. I'm not changing the settings too much from what Jason had. I had to go up in shock pressure a little bit to hit my sag numbers. I'm actually leaving the fork as is because the rear end of this bike feels a little softer. So I want to make sure the fork matched in feel, and we're gonna go see how she feels.
Some other frame details worth mentioning is that the shock is mounted at 90 degrees with the reservoir pointed down. This means that the heavy part of the shock is not moving as the suspension compresses. Rear end spacing is Boost 148/12. Cables are all run externally, except for the shifter cable, which does go through the rear triangle. And throughout the frame, standard steel hardware is used for ease of replacement. As I mentioned, we're getting to test one of Framework's team bikes, and it came decked out with all of their team sponsored components. This includes a Fox 40 fork with the Grip X2 damper, TRP's Evo Pro brakes with 220mm rotors front and rear, a TRP Evo 7-speed drivetrain, 5-dev cranks with an O-chain spider, Spank Vibracore bars with a 40mm Spank stem, and then we swapped the NV wheels and Continental tires for our own control wheels and tires, a set of Crank Brothers Synthesis 2.0 alloy wheels with DH casing, Max Grip, Maxxis high rollers.
So my initial impressions with the frameworks are I got on it and felt comfy pretty much immediately. I think the bar height relative to the BB drop is what I am used to because I'm coming off of Fury. It's similar, but this one even feels a little bit lower and the bars feel a little bit higher. But overall the frame is quite light, which means even though it's long, low, and super stable, it's easy to pick the bike up off the ground. One thing I did notice that's quite interesting is it's long, so if you go into a corner accidentally on the inside and the bike gets kicked out, it's a light rear end. So like once it starts to get kicked out, it keeps going. It's fine because the Geo completely saves you, and once that happens, there's no, pit in the bottom of your stomach, like something's gonna go wrong. You're just like, oh yeah, that happened. Commit to it and it'll be fine. And I think that pretty much summarizes how this bike behaves. If you just go on a line and commit to it, it'll probably be fine, which is great. Just don't get yourself into too much trouble. So we spent a few days riding the frameworks. Where did you end up setting your bike up?
So I would say with the geometry of this bike being a little unique as it's long, it's tall, it's pretty low, I struggle with balance. So after the first few runs, I did end up tweaking things quite a bit. I had a humbling experience of getting the setups Neko recommended, which were not wrong or bad setups, but I just wasn't fast enough for them. They were too stiff and too firm, and I was rear biased more than I wanted. So I ended up taking out volume reducers, lowering fork pressure, I actually took air out of the shock as well to get to the recommended 20 millimeters of sag. And that made a world of a difference for me. And I was able to have more weight over the front end, be more balanced between the front and rear wheel. With the rear end of this bike being quite long at 460 millimeters, it helps balance how tall and long this bike is. With a stack number that's higher than probably any bike I really have ridden, it didn't feel super big. And with the bottom bracket that's really low, it didn't feel really low. You have quite a bit of room, it seems to me, between where you sit on the bike and where the front and rear wheel is, which adds a lot of balance. I did go to the middle progression setting on the rear shock. That to me helped give the bike a more consistent feel and a little bit more support. I think with how it came in the most progressive setting, I was getting a little bit of wallow in the mid-stroke, and then it was ramping pretty hard, which was adding to that sacked out feeling I was getting and kind of choppered feeling. So going to that middle position helped give me that weight over the front end I was looking for. Where did you end up? Because I know you had an easier route getting to suspension settings that you were looking for, and then you played around more at the position of the shock than I did.
Sure. As soon as I hopped on this bike, it felt quite familiar. The first thing I noticed was going through some of the same trails we've been riding, I could just lean into corners and not think about, am I worried about losing traction? Like that wasn't even in the back of my mind. I kind of just committed to them, had no doubts about being able to make that corner work. The stability the bike has is really impressive, but it's combined with a really light rear end. You have a bike that feels long, but when you go to get that rear end to get over to one side of the trail, it doesn't take a lot of effort. So it's really well balanced there. One thing that was really neat about the bike as well is the BB was and is quite low. And I was a little concerned that I'd start to drag feet, even without pedaling, just into rocks. And though I did clip a few rocks, it wasn't overly low, but I was so in the bike, my confidence was really high. And what was neat about it is the BB never got lower and lower because the braking characteristic of the bike, and it's a horse link bike, so they typically start to rise slightly under braking, but your bars are nice and high in front of you. So even if the rear end is rising, your bars are still in a great comfortable position going into chunky sections where you're on the limit and you're like, I really need to not crash right now and I really need to slow down. Super composed, very comfortable. There was never a thought that I was in danger. I really liked it.
A lot of the things you're saying, I would double it. I would say that on the spectrum of downhill bikes, this is really far towards that end of you can hold on and plow. And it might not be the most exciting or lively bike. It's a bike that also favors trails that have a high average speed and give you that gravity to get the speed going.
Yeah.
It's not maybe the most fun or has the most personality on low angle trails where you're needing to generate the speed to keep it going.
Yeah.
Which is to be expected. I mean, it's a intentional World Cup race bike.
Yep.
So I was cool with once we got into some of the more raw terrain where there's holes coming at you and roots coming at you, and you don't have that freedom to be as selective with lines, the fastest option is to hold on.
Yeah.
This catered to that super well. And as you're saying, like with the bar height, for me, yeah, like in the parking lot, I'm like, these are really high bars, but on the trail, it gave me like a nice platform to stand behind and be comfortable just being able to hammer into things. I feel like it's really cliche just being like, oh, this bike, the harder I push, the more it was like willing to support that.
Yeah.
But it rang really true at this because it took me a while to get comfortable on it. And then as I got more comfortable and I was able to, we got into more aggressive trails, I was like, holy cow. Like, I get why you see Asa and Anna going so fast on it because they're able to ride at a high speed and this bike's able to manage that so well.
Totally. What's neat about this bike is the most linear progression setup is the most progressive setup from the previous generation of bike. And though I could go to the more progressive setups, I might not be fast enough to be able to handle that, but I definitely want to play around with that, especially on like the wet days where I need a little bit more suppleness off the top.
Yep.
It's cool that we have that adjustability. I like the simplicity of not having too many chips sometimes, just because it's like, this is the bike, it's good, go ride it. Like, you don't have to faff around too much. And I really like how it ended up. I don't need any flip chips on this bike.
Yeah, and I think that is a pretty big talking point with this bike, because outside of changing the progression, you're left with how it is. You can change reach with a different headset, but that was my exact thought, is you're probably intentionally going to go buy this to try to go racing and be competitive and go fast.
Yep.
It doesn't need the other adjustments. I think it's easy to look at it and maybe think it's so simple and look at other bikes that have a lot of options and maybe lean towards like, I need that, and like, that's something I want. But for what this is designed for, I think that adjustment alone gives you a lot to play with.
Yep.
And then the geometry and the capability of the bike lives up to what you should expect for a bike that's built to race World Cups.
Yeah. The compliance of the frame was really well balanced. The rear end being so light to move out of the way of obstacles more easily was more than stout enough for anything that we were able to put it through. It never wound up in any corners, but at the same time, when you're on the limit of grip and you're in an off-camber section and you're like, I really hope the rear end doesn't step out on me because the frame doesn't slightly comply to the ground. It didn't do it. It did that beautifully. Like it held traction really well. Well done, really well balanced. It complements the braking characteristic really well. Another thing to point out is because the bars are so high, you don't have a lot of weight on your hands. And in the braking bumps especially, this bike, my hands felt the best, which is really cool because that's a big problem that I struggle with at bike parks. And I didn't have to think about it on this bike. So really cool, unexpected feature.
Closing this out, Neko Mulally's Frameworks downhill bike. What's your bottom line on it?
If you're looking for a race bike, buy this bike. It's easy to go really fast on, and if you're not winning, it's on the rider, it's not on the bike.
I don't even know how much more I can honestly add to that. I would agree. I would add that if you're going racing and you're more of a privateer or weekend warrior, the bike is simple. It's easy to live with. We didn't have anything crazy happen during 2 days of aggressive riding. Simple, it's easy to find parts for, easy to find hardware for, all those good things. Yeah, I think that confirm this is the Privateer's race bike.